There is a quiet, unbreakable strength that forms the moment you stop waiting for an audience to your life. It doesn't arrive with a grand announcement. There is no ceremony, just a deep, settling silence within you where the need for applause finally dies. And in that space, something far more powerful begins to grow. For so long, maybe you carried a hidden hope, a belief that if you suffered beautifully enough, someone would finally see it. That if you worded your pain perfectly, a rescuer would understand. This is a fragile, human dream. But then life unfolds. Your phone stays dark. The world moves on, utterly indifferent to the storm inside you. The world is busy with its own chaos, and that indifference, it's not a judgment on your worth. It's not a personal rejection. It is simply the reality of a world where everyone is the main character of their own struggle. If you build your identity on being seen and understood by others, you are building on sand. You will spend your life feeling invisible, perpetually waiting for a validation that never comes. That ache of being overlooked, it's not cruelty, it's a teacher, and it's trying to show you the way out. When we are young, we are taught a subtle lie, that pain deserves a medal, that endurance should be rewarded with comfort. But life doesn't work that way. It doesn't send angels when you're on your knees. People forget, they scroll, they become consumed by their own battles. This isn't malice, it's humanity. And this realization, as harsh as it feels to admit, is the very gateway to your freedom. Because once you stop expecting the world to respond to your pain, you stop waiting, you stop freezing your life, hoping someone will notice you're stuck. You begin to move for reasons that have nothing to do with an audience. Carl Jung once observed that the world will ask who you are, and if you don't know, it will tell you. But what he didn't say is that most people aren't asking because they care. They ask to categorize you, to fit you into a box that makes their own world easier to navigate. They don't see you, they see their idea of you. And the moment you stop performing for that external gaze is the moment you finally start living for something real. There is a certain sorrow in realizing you are not the central figure in anyone else's story. But this isn't rejection, it's gravity. No one owes you understanding. No one is required to hold your hand through the fog. Your inner fire needs no outside wind. And while this can make the external world seem colder, it makes your internal world burn infinitely brighter. Because now, you are the one lighting the fire. No more waiting for someone to decipher the meaning in your silence. No more hoping your quiet struggle will be noticed and mended by a passing savior. You are the one who gets it now. And that understanding changes everything. That old disappointment loses its sting and transforms into something new. Clarity. And clarity is the first, the most fundamental form of freedom. This is the core of Stoic strength. Not an absence of feeling, but a refusal to outsource your healing. Marcus Aurelius wrote in his private meditations, "Do not waste the rest of your life in thoughts about others." He was reminding himself to stop hoping his neighbors would see his struggles and validate his worth. The more you focus on being seen, the less you actually see yourself. And in a cruel irony, the more invisible you become to your own soul. You become background noise in someone else's drama, instead of the clear signal in your own life. But when you finally release the hope that others will witness your suffering and give it meaning, that is when you begin constructing something indestructible within. Not because you've become harder, but because you've become clearer. You start to see how much of your identity was built around the expectation of being seen. You believed someone, somewhere, should care. And when they didn't, you took it as proof of your own inadequacy. But here is the truth we often avoid. Just because people don't care doesn't mean you are unworthy. It just means they are human, flawed, overwhelmed, distracted, just like you. The game was never about winning their attention. It was about waking up to the fact that you were always the one watching. You have been the sole, permanent resident of your own mind this entire time. You are the only consistent witness to the full weight of your thoughts. That isn't a curse. It is a profound gift, because it means you hold the power to change the narrative, not them, you. There is immense power in being unseen. There is razor-sharp clarity in walking your path without needing a crowd to cheer you on. Epictetus, the former slave who became a great teacher, said, "Don't explain your philosophy, embody it." This is what happens. You stop hoping to be seen, and you start the quiet work of becoming, not for attention, not for recognition, but because something deep within you refuses to stay small any longer. The pain that once felt like a prison becomes your blueprint. The silence that once felt haunting becomes your most honest teacher. The solitude that once scared you becomes your home. And when that internal shift occurs, you no longer feel the need to broadcast your wounds. You simply carry them differently, not as a heavy burden, but as quiet proof that you continued walking. So perhaps being overlooked wasn't the tragedy you thought it was. Maybe it was the necessary beginning, the slow, quiet death of an illusion and the birth of something real, something solid, something that no longer seeks validation because it is too busy building something permanent. You don't need to be seen to become something significant. You need to see yourself clearly and honestly, without decoration. That is the precise point where everything changes. That is where your real life truly begins. When no one is listening, something unexpected happens. You start listening to yourself, not the surface voice that just echoes what others expect, but the quieter, deeper one underneath. The one you've ignored because it wasn't loud enough to compete with the noise of the world. But in the absence of applause, silence grows deep roots. You begin to hear your own thoughts, not as background static, but as guidance. It feels strange at first, uncomfortable. You are accustomed to checking your reflection in the eyes of others. But when those eyes turn away, you learn to see yourself from the inside out. And that is when the foundation shifts. You begin to move differently, not because someone told you to, not because someone believed in you, but because you decided to show up, without witnesses, without cheerleaders, without anyone holding the door open for you. Self-reliance doesn't arrive in a burst of confidence. It arrives slowly, often disguised as loneliness. You wake up one day and realize no one is checking in, no one is asking for your progress, and instead of crumbling, you start building. You begin taking yourself seriously, not because others do, but because you have grown tired of your own waiting. How many times have you paused your own growth, hoping someone would give you permission to continue, hoping they would say it's the right time, the right move, the right direction? But what if that permission never comes? What if no one ever tells you that you're ready? Would you stay frozen forever, or would you finally claim the authority that was always yours? That is the true genesis of power, not in being chosen, but in choosing yourself. The world teaches us to seek validation as if it were oxygen, but the Stoics knew a deeper truth, that peace isn't found in popularity, it is found in disciplined self-possession. Epictetus said, "No person is free who is not master of themselves." Freedom doesn't come from being supported, it comes from knowing that even when you are not, you will continue. That even when the room is utterly empty, you will do the work anyway. And not from a place of bitterness, but because the work itself matters. Because you matter. When you understand that, showing up ceases to be a performance. It becomes an act of profound self-respect. And in that quiet consistency, a new relationship forms. Not with the world, but with your own mind. You begin to trust it more. You ask it what it needs. You listen to the fatigue in your body, the pull in your gut, the fire behind your chest. You stop outsourcing your intuition. You stop living reactively at the mercy of every external event. Carl Jung once said, "Who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakes." That awakening doesn't feel like a dramatic, cinematic breakthrough. It feels like a series of subtle, consistent decisions that build a foundation underneath your feet. You start keeping the promises you make to yourself. You go for the walk. You write the words. You say no when something drains your spirit. These are not loud, flashy acts, but they build something no one can see from the outside: trust. And trust in yourself is the ultimate currency of freedom. A quiet, unshakable strength develops when you realize you are your own backup plan, when the silence no longer frightens you, when you don't need to announce your every move or explain your every feeling, when you don't beg for someone to notice that you're trying, because you know the effort you're making. You know the storms you've walked through. You know what it cost you to still be here, choosing growth over collapse. That isn't arrogance, that is integrity. You are no longer performing for the world, you are becoming for yourself. There will still be moments of doubt, moments when you wish someone would say, "I see you." But now, you don't depend on it. You no longer fall apart in its absence. You carry yourself with the quiet awareness that you have earned your own respect. And that is rare. That is what makes people pause when you enter a room. Not because you demanded their attention, but because your energy communicates without words. "I don't need it." Seneca once wrote that the greatest empire is to rule yourself. And ruling yourself doesn't look like perfection. It looks like consistency in the face of invisibility. It looks like doing what matters, even when no one applauds. It looks like holding your standards high, especially when no one is watching. When you build from that place, you are no longer dependent on external structures for your stability. You become the structure. You don't collapse when someone pulls away. You don't unravel when someone misunderstands you, because your foundation was never built on their understanding in the first place. It was built on your own clarity, on quiet decisions made in solitude, on the strength of waking up and moving forward, again and again, because that is who you have chosen to become. And this is the most vital part. Once you begin to rely on yourself in this deep way, you stop resenting others for not being who you needed them to be. You release them. You stop waiting for them to return, to notice, to explain. You no longer chain your progress to their presence. You move, regardless. Not with coldness, but with a newfound grace. You become free, not because the pain is gone, but because it no longer defines your path. You carry it, but it does not carry you. That is what true self-reliance looks like. Not an absence of need, but a deep, inner steadiness that says, "Even if no one sees me, even if no one comes, even if no one helps, I will keep going, because this life is mine to live, and I will not wait for anyone's permission to become who I was always meant to be." We exist in a culture that rewards constant exposure. Every feeling is shared, every wound is displayed, every struggle is turned into content for others to consume. The more visibly broken you appear, the more attention you often receive. But not all attention is healing. Some of it is hollow. Some of it keeps you dependent on being seen as wounded in order to feel connected. And slowly, without even realizing it, you can begin to perform your pain. You start editing your suffering, packaging it for sympathy. You turn authentic emotions into a product, thinking it will bring you closer to others. But it doesn't. It just makes your healing public property. What was once sacred becomes consumed. What was once your private inner world becomes a storyline for others to follow and then forget. There is a critical difference between honesty and emotional performance. One comes from depth, the other from habit. One is quiet and real, the other is often rehearsed. And most of us were never taught to tell the difference. We confuse expression with healing. We think that just because we talk about a wound, we have worked through it. But sometimes, the more you speak of a wound, the more you keep it alive. Not everything needs to be narrated. Some things need to be felt, endured, and integrated in silence. The Stoics were not emotionless. They were composed. They believed in feeling deeply, but without letting those feelings control the trajectory of their lives. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Be like the cliff against which the waves continually break. It stands firm and tames the fury of the water around it." He didn't mean to suppress emotion. He meant not to let it become a performance, let it become presence. We've become conditioned to believe that silence is weakness, that if we don't express every feeling, we are hiding. But some things are not meant to be shared. Some parts of your story are sacred precisely because they belong only to you. Keeping something private doesn't mean you are ashamed. It means you are protecting something precious. And that can unnerve people because silence cannot be dissected. It can't be pitied or praised. It demands space. It creates mystery. And mystery, in a world addicted to access, feels threatening. Carl Jung often spoke of the shadow, the parts of ourselves we bury. But he also said, "Solitude is for me a fount of healing which makes my life worth living." The truth is, not every form of healing needs to be visible. Some of the deepest transformations happen when no one is watching. When you're sitting with your thoughts, when you're choosing not to respond, not to prove, not to explain, when you let your emotions pass through you without needing them to be seen, liked, or validated. That isn't suppression, that is sovereignty. It is easy to mistake the loud for the strong, but strength isn't always loud. Sometimes it is quiet and still and completely uninterested in being understood. You don't have to prove your growth. You don't have to narrate your healing in real time. You can keep it to yourself and let the results speak later. That patience, that refusal to perform, is what gives you genuine power. Because it means your peace is not up for public negotiation. There is a unique beauty in becoming unexplainable, in being someone who no longer shares every emotional bruise just to receive a moment of softness in return. You learn that not everyone deserves access to your struggle, not because you are hiding, but because you have stopped offering your pain as a currency to earn connection. When you stop broadcasting your wounds, you stop attracting people who are only there to observe the damage, and slowly you begin attracting people who respect what you have built in the silence. Seneca said, "No man is more unhappy than he who never faces adversity, for he is not permitted to prove himself." But once you have faced adversity and grown from it, you don't need to display the scars to justify your strength. You don't need to keep reopening wounds to remind others of what you've endured. You've proven it to yourself. That is enough. The moment you realize your emotions are not a currency for attention, you stop spending them so carelessly. You start guarding your inner life like something rare, because it is. And in that guarding, you find clarity. You start to realize how much energy was spent explaining what didn't need to be explained. You feel how much power was lost in asking to be understood by people who didn't have the depth to understand themselves. You watch how the crowd celebrates vulnerability, but forgets to mention that real vulnerability isn't exposure, it's discernment. It's knowing when to speak and when to remain silent. It's choosing who gets to see the real you and who only gets the surface. You don't need the world to validate your emotions for them to matter. You don't need to turn your pain into art just to justify why it hurts. You can hold that pain quietly. You can heal without a display. You can grieve without an audience. And when you do, something incredible happens. You stop fearing the silence. You begin to feel at home inside it. Because it no longer feels like abandonment, it feels like a return to yourself, a return to what is real. There is nothing wrong with expressing emotion, but when expression becomes a performance, it robs you of your power. Sovereignty begins the moment you choose presence over performance, the moment you stop explaining yourself to feel safe, the moment you realize your peace isn't fragile, it's forged in solitude. And when others can no longer predict you through your emotional patterns, they start to respect the depth they can't access. Not because you became colder, but because you became wiser. You don't owe anyone a front row seat to your healing. And you don't need to bleed in public to prove you're human. Some things are meant to be held close. Some truths are meant to be whispered only to yourself. That isn't hiding, that is maturity. And in a world that glorifies noise, that kind of quiet becomes its own form of rebellion, its own form of freedom. Rejection feels deeply personal because it touches something primal in us, the need to belong, to be seen, to be accepted as we are. But often, what feels like rejection is actually redirection. You weren't dismissed because you lacked value. You were pushed aside because your depth couldn't be digested by shallow eyes. Your silence was mistaken for absence, your self-containment for coldness. You were misunderstood not because you failed to express, but because you carry a frequency most people aren't tuned to. That doesn't make you wrong, it makes you rare. The world, for the most part, doesn't recognize nuance. It celebrates what is easy to label, easy to consume, easy to predict. So when you don't fit into those neat boxes, you become inconvenient. And in a world rushing to categorize, inconvenience is often discarded before it's ever explored. It's easy to internalize this as a flaw, to think, if I were louder, if I smiled more, if I softened my edges, maybe I'd be accepted. But that is the trap. The belief that your value lies in being legible to others. You weren't made to shrink into their comprehension. Carl Jung wrote, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. Not who others can easily understand, not who fits the mold, but who you are when no one is watching and you've stopped trying to be approved." That kind of authenticity often comes at the cost of comfort. It invites misunderstanding. It requires solitude. But it also creates space for a deeper kind of transformation, one that isn't driven by applause, but by alignment. There comes a point when you stop interpreting rejection as loss and begin to see it as clarity. Every person who overlooks you, every space that doesn't welcome you, every silence that follows your presence, it all reveals something. Not about your worth, but about where your energy doesn't belong. That insight is priceless. It saves you years of self-doubt. It teaches you to invest where you are valued, not just tolerated. And once you learn that, you stop chasing explanations. You stop wondering why someone didn't choose you. You realize that not being chosen was the blessing, because it gave you back to yourself. There's a quiet revolution that begins when you stop trying to be understood. You begin to redirect all the energy you used to spend on being seen into actually building something. Something that doesn't need to be explained. Something that stands on its own. A body of work, a lifestyle, a discipline. You shift from emotional scarcity, constantly trying to prove your worth, to psychological sovereignty, where your existence is no longer up for debate. That's where your center of gravity moves inward. You're not moved by approval or rattled by dismissal. You become grounded, and grounded people are magnetic. Not because they seek attention, but because they carry something stable in a world that spins too fast. People will still misread you. They'll create stories to make sense of your quiet, your ambition, your boundaries. Let them. You're not responsible for correcting every false narrative. Marcus Aurelius said, "The opinion of 10,000 men is of no value if none of them know anything about the subject." You are the subject. And most people don't know you, not really. They see glimpses, fragments. They project, assume, simplify. And, while that used to bother you, Now you see it for what it is: noise. The moment you let go of the need to correct the noise, your focus sharpens. You get more done. You sleep deeper. You move cleaner. Because now your life is no longer built around being perceived correctly. It's built around being lived truthfully. There is immense peace in that. You stop wasting energy explaining your process, your priorities, your silence. You don't justify why you've gone quiet. You don't explain why you walked away. You don't decode your boundaries. You just live them, not as a defense, but as a natural extension of self-respect. You become someone who moves with conviction, not commentary. And over time, that creates distance not between you and others, but between you and the noise that once clouded your mind. Rejection becomes revelation when you realize it didn't shrink you, it sculpted you. It showed you where not to go, who not to become, what not to settle for. Every door that closed clarified the direction. Every silence refined your voice. Every betrayal deepened your discernment. What once felt like exile now feels like space. Space to build, space to breathe, space to finally become not someone acceptable, but someone undeniable. And this shift, this movement from wanting to be seen to choosing to become, it changes everything. You stop speaking to be heard and start speaking to build. You stop walking into rooms to prove your worth and start walking into rooms already knowing it. You stop asking if you're too much, too quiet, too intense, and start asking if the space is too small for your truth. You stop apologizing for your depth and start protecting it. That's not arrogance, that's arrival. So if you've been overlooked, let it be your initiation. If you've been misunderstood, let it be your turning point. You're not here to explain yourself into someone's comfort. You're here to become someone whose presence rewrites the room. And that begins when you finally understand rejection isn't the end of your worth. It's the beginning of your clarity. People talk about loneliness as if it's something to escape from, as if the absence of others means the absence of worth. But solitude, when chosen with intention, is not isolation, it's transformation. It doesn't shrink you, it burns away everything that doesn't belong. At first, it feels like silence, a heavy, echoing silence where the noise of the world fades and only your own thoughts remain. But slowly, that silence sharpens. It becomes a mirror that doesn't lie. And what you see there, in the absence of distraction, is not your weakness, it's your foundation. Solitude doesn't destroy you. It reveals what was always there, underneath the noise. The craving for approval, the impulse to please, the subtle performances you didn't even know you were giving. Those things begin to melt away in the furnace of being alone. And in their place, something harder forms, something real. It's in that stillness that you begin to meet yourself honestly. Not the version of you curated for others, not the identity shaped by expectation or obligation, but the raw material of your mind, your values, your fears. And for many people, that's exactly why solitude is so terrifying. Because when there's no one left to impress, no one left to chase, you're finally left with the truth. No performance, no edits, just you. And while that might feel like loss at first, it's actually the beginning of freedom. Epictetus wrote, "It's not things that disturb us, but our judgment of them. In solitude, those judgments become visible. You start to realize how many of your thoughts aren't yours. How many of your fears came from someone else's voice? How much of your identity was built on avoiding rejection rather than seeking truth? This is where the internal alchemy begins. The discomfort doesn't disappear, but it transforms. What once felt like loneliness starts to feel like privacy. What once felt like exile begins to feel like clarity. You start hearing your own voice, louder than the world's opinions. And that voice, uncensored, unpolished, unafraid, teaches you how to live. You begin to understand that peace isn't found in a full calendar or a full room. Peace is found in presence, in being able to sit with yourself and not flinch, to feel the weight of your own mind and not run from it. That's not detachment, that's mastery. Carl Jung said, "The man who looks outside dreams, the man who looks inside awakens." Solitude is what forces you to look inward, to awaken. And with that awakening comes a kind of responsibility. You can no longer blame the noise for your confusion. You can't blame others for your stagnation. It's just you now. And that's where the power begins. Because the moment you stop externalizing your life, you reclaim the ability to direct it. You're no longer waiting for someone to come save you, validate you, or guide you. You start building your compass from the inside out. And that compass points to something sturdier than attention. It points to integrity. Most people avoid solitude because they don't like what they feel when everything else is stripped away. But that discomfort is exactly what makes the process necessary. You don't become strong by avoiding yourself. You become strong by confronting what's unhealed, unclear, and uncertain, and doing so without an audience. That's the difference between solitude and isolation. Isolation is running away. Solitude is running deeper. And in that deeper place, your resilience is formed. Quietly, consistently, without applause. You begin to make decisions differently, not from a place of, "Will this be accepted?" but from a place of, "Does this align?" You start trusting your instincts more because you've spent time with them. You've listened long enough to separate intuition from insecurity. And that's a level of self-knowledge that can't be taught. It has to be earned through silence, through space, through the kind of mental stillness that teaches you how to carry your own weight. That kind of clarity doesn't shout, it doesn't announce itself, but others feel it in the way you speak, in the way you move, in the way you don't chase what used to pull you apart. Solitude makes your boundaries sharper. You stop saying yes just to avoid disappointing someone. You stop engaging in conversations that drain your spirit. You learn that no is not unkind, it's honest. And honesty, when cultivated in solitude, becomes a way of living. You don't need to prove anything anymore. You don't need to justify your distance or explain your focus. You simply live it, because you've done the work in silence, and now your energy speaks for itself. Seneca once wrote, "We suffer more in imagination than in reality." Solitude helps you see the difference. It pulls you out of imagined disasters, false narratives, and inherited fears. It plants you in what's real. And in that soil, something unshakable grows, a sense of self that doesn't shift with trends, a direction that doesn't wobble when misunderstood, a strength that isn't loud but lasting. When you return to the world after time alone, you come back different, not distant but deliberate, not bitter but boundaried. You don't speak to be heard. You speak because your words come from stillness, not from noise. You're not easily swayed, not easily shaken, because you know the ground you stand on. You built it yourself, one quiet moment at a time. So no, solitude isn't punishment, it's preparation. It's the training ground for self-trust, self-respect, and self-direction. It's not where life ends, it's where it begins to deepen. And the person who has learned to walk through their own mind, alone and awake, becomes someone the world can't easily move, because they don't belong to the noise anymore, they belong to themselves. There comes a quiet turning point in every life where the version of you that once felt essential begins to fall apart. Not with a dramatic crash, but with a slow, undeniable erosion. The old self, the one who needed approval, who bent to fit into spaces too small, who rehearsed words just to be liked, that self begins to feel heavy, outdated, false. You try to carry it a little longer out of habit, out of fear, maybe even out of guilt. but it drags, it stiffens, and eventually it begins to rot. That's not failure. That's evolution. When something dies within you, it isn't always a loss. Sometimes it's the first breath of something deeper, the start of a more honest existence. At first, it's disorienting. You don't feel quite like yourself anymore, but you also can't go back. The mask doesn't fit. The old patterns feel exhausting. You say less, but what you say carries more weight. You stop explaining, not because you have nothing to say, but because you no longer feel the need to be understood by everyone. The chase for approval fades. And in its place, something steady begins to grow. You move with more intent. You don't fill silence out of nervousness. You don't perform your personality to make people more comfortable. You simply stand like a mountain, still, watchful, unmoved. It's strange how people respond when this shift happens. Some distance themselves, others question what changed. They'll say, "You seem colder, more distant, less fun." What they're really sensing is that you've stopped making yourself available for emotional labor you never consented to in the first place. You've withdrawn from the game of constant reassurance, of being overly palatable. You're no longer addicted to being liked. And that absence makes people uncomfortable because now they can no longer predict you. And unpredictability in someone who once conformed feels threatening to those still clinging to old versions of who you were. But here's what they don't see. That version of you needed to go. It needed to fall away so you could finally move freely, so you could stop editing your truth to fit someone else's narrative. Carl Jung once wrote, "We cannot change anything unless we accept it. Condemnation does not liberate, it oppresses." You didn't kill your old self out of hatred, you outgrew it, out of truth. You stopped condemning your need for space, your desire for solitude, your craving for a simpler, quieter strength. And in that acceptance, the old self was released, not as a punishment, but as a rite of passage. You don't need to explain this process to others. The people who truly understand won't ask. And those who don't were never meant to walk with this next version of you anyway. You start to notice who respects your silence and who only knew you for your noise. You realize who valued your essence and who only loved your accessibility. That clarity is painful, but necessary. It separates the seasonal from the lifelong. It refines your circle. It clears the emotional clutter you were too polite to discard. And it makes space for alignment. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way." That's what the disappearance of your old self is. It feels like a loss, but it opens a path where you no longer chase connection, but attract it by being grounded. A path where you don't need to be known by many to feel known within yourself. You don't seek mirrors in others anymore. You found your own reflection, and it's enough. There's something sacred about becoming someone who no longer needs to announce their change. You don't post about it. You don't campaign for recognition. You just live differently, and the difference becomes impossible to ignore. People feel it in your energy, your decisions, your detachment from petty dramas. They sense a calmness in you that can't be faked, because it came at a cost. It was earned in the quiet dismantling of your former self. In the nights you doubted everything and still chose to continue. In the moments where you wanted to explain but chose instead to evolve. You're no longer triggered by the same things. You're no longer drawn to the same conversations. You no longer feel the pull to be constantly available. And at first, that feels like loneliness. But then it becomes something else. Freedom. Because you realize you were never really connected to those people, those places, or those roles. You were connected to who you had to become in order to stay there. And now, that person is gone. Seneca said, "Every new beginning comes from some other beginning's end." This isn't just a shift in mindset, it's a rebirth. And like all rebirths, it's quiet at first, underrated, uncelebrated, but incredibly real. And with time, it becomes undeniable, not because you announce it, but because you embody it. You become someone who moves with quiet authority, who doesn't need to explain their values because they live them. Someone whose absence speaks just as loudly as their presence used to, not out of pride, but out of peace. The old self was necessary. It got you here. It learned the hard lessons, absorbed the wounds, fought for belonging. But its time is over. You don't owe it anything except gratitude and release. And now, in its place, you stand, clearer, stronger, unapologetically you. No longer looking back for validation, no longer reaching forward in desperation, but grounded, here, now, whole. And that, more than anything, is what makes you impossible to categorize, because you've stopped being what the world told you to be. You've become who you were always meant to be. True presence doesn't come from how much you say or how loudly you say it. It comes from how little you need to say. There's a kind of quiet power in someone who has stopped seeking validation, a kind of weight in their stillness. You feel it when they walk into a room and don't try to control the space. They simply are. They don't need to announce their presence because their energy carries it for them. They don't push to be noticed, yet they're the one people watch. It's not arrogance, it's not performance. It's the confidence of someone who's no longer hungry for permission to exist. In a world obsessed with appearances, that kind of restraint is rare. And because it's rare, it's magnetic. You begin to realize that real strength is quiet, not hidden, but uninterested in performance. It's the product of someone who has met their fear and sat with it. Someone who has walked through pain without turning it into a show. Someone who doesn't need to posture or puff up because they're not operating from a place of insecurity. They've already faced the abyss and came back without needing to prove anything to anyone. Carl Jung once said, "A man who has not passed through the inferno of his passions has never overcome them." When you've done that kind of internal work, it changes how you move. It changes how you speak, or how often you choose not to. Because now, silence becomes a statement. You stop reacting to every opinion. You stop defending your every move. You let go of the compulsion to clarify yourself to those committed to misunderstanding you, not out of apathy, but out of alignment. You understand now that if someone doesn't feel your value, no amount of words will make them see it. And if someone does feel your value, you won't have to convince them. So you conserve your energy. You speak only when it matters, and when you do speak, people listen. Not because you're louder, but because you're selective. Your words weren't scattered, they were earned. They weren't about being heard, they were about expressing something real, something rooted. There's a power in that detachment. Not the cold kind that pushes people away, but the self-contained kind that doesn't cling to outcomes.